Over the many years of playing D&D that I've enjoyed, there are a couple campaigns that always stand out. One of the earliest D&D campaigns that I was a part of that fits this description was known as the Hatharac Islands campaign. This one stood out for a couple reasons. The most notable one was that it was one of the only campaigns that my middle school to high school age range D&D group actually played all the way through, rather than simply abandoning halfway once we got bored with our characters and decided to go do something else. How it ultimately began is not wholly important, so I'll just kind of breeze through. A bunch of Yahoo nobodies were hired by a local religious organization on the Hatharac Islands to investigate some strange goings-on. It was believed that there was a dark underground organization behind some strange events, and we were told to go and investigate. We actually made it through a couple dungeons, but then something happened. One of the players decided to take it upon himself to eliminate the rest of us. Basically, we had just gotten through a very difficult boss fight, one in which my character had actually been crit and instant killed, and every other party member was in really rough shape. And this one player decided it was going to be really fun if he just went around to all the other wounded characters and killed them all. And in doing so, could collect all the loot for himself and run away into the sunset laughing. The player in real life had been going through a bit of a douchey phase around this time, and this was sort of his way of acting it out. In all honesty, the DM at that time probably could have simply said no, and maybe he should have, but the DM was really willing to let us try things and, quote, be in character, so he allowed it to happen, and one of the players just killed the rest of us. And this created something of a problem for the DM, because the DM actually really liked this campaign, and he really wanted to play it all the way through. And so, as a result, we came back to the table the next game session with sort of the screen fades to black, and the sign of 6 months later comes up on the screen. And then we get to focus in on the new party of adventurers. This party was started with a new character, played by me, a paladin who arrives at the Hatharac Islands having received a message calling for aid by the religious group that hired the last group of Yahoos. I go to one of the main cities and discover that the religious organization's headquarters has been broken into and the entire group has been massacred. I go through the notes that the religious organization had been collecting and try to figure out what happened. I pieced together a couple pieces of information, not because I myself was so smart or because I rolled particularly well, and more just because the DM was really desperate to get this campaign back on the rails. The pieces of information I find are as follows. First, I find that the religious organization was beginning to write out a new list of mercenaries that they were looking to hire. Basically, the rest of the party that I would soon be collecting. In addition, there were a list of possible nearby locations of interest. The closest and most heavily encouraged by the DM for us to go to first was a canyon that there seemed to be some dark dealings in. And then there was also a list of some other possible locations that were very clearly meant to be pursued once we'd leveled up a little bit. So, I spend the majority of the rest of the first session going around and collecting the party members, or in-game, hiring the mercenaries that were suggested. So, as a run-through of the total party we would have to finish out the Hatharac Island campaign, we have me, the tank of the party, a paladin. We have the second party member, who was a ranger. There's not really much to say about him or his character. The player in question didn't really talk much. He was just a generally very quiet person, and so he never really contributed much to the roleplay or investigation elements. He just kind of sat there, and when it came to his turn, he just said, "I shoot my bow." So, DPS. Then, we had a soul knife who decided that his character was going to be found completely passed out drunk next to pigs in a farmer's backyard. For some reason, he was really obsessed with having all of his characters be comedically alcoholic, but he could summon blades out of his hand, so he was welcome to the team. Then we have our spellcasters. For the purposes of this story and those of you who may listen to it, I'm going to call the first of the spellcasters a sorcerer. Technically speaking, he wasn't a sorcerer. He was one of those D&D 3.5 specialized alternate classes that you would find in one of the many expansion books. But for all intents and purposes, he was a sorcerer, just with sort of a Eastern mythological bent. So we're just going to say sorcerer. And then the last player was, again, I'm going to kind of summarize him as artificer this time. In reality, again, another 3.5 bizarre specialized class, but I'm going to say artificer just to keep things simple and rolling. I'll be honest at this point, I think there may have also been another player with us. For some reason, I have the memory of a fighter at the point where I was collecting everybody, but I don't remember a single thing, if he was there, that he did, or any part he played in the entire story. So there may just be an extra party member that I never mentioned. I don't remember, though, but if there was, and you see this, you who was the player, sorry. So anyway, we have a whole party and one potential ghost, but we are ready for adventure. So, we had our first destination, the canyon with the dark dealings inside. As the focal point of the early part of the story, my paladin character decided where we would go, and we went in that direction. The other players immediately fell into step as far as the general idea of the story going, basically immediately asking me when they were going to get paid. And they kind of kept this up as a running gag for the first few sessions. However, eventually, towards the end of the first session, we arrive at the outskirts of the canyon. However, there's a problem. There is a drop bridge, which is currently raised up at the moment, that needs to be lowered for us to actually access where we're trying to go. The DM had designed this as a puzzle where we would have to be creative or risk chucking weapons across trying to cut the release rope and risk losing them. And then we discovered that the soul knife could just endlessly create throwable weapons out of his soul energy. And so we basically just stood there while he rolled dozens of times until eventually he just happened to hit the rope, and the DM, slightly disappointed, let us all get across the bridge. And that was basically where we ended the first session, ready to fight whatever this darkness was, as the DM gave us this final description that we look into this deeply protected area of the ravine with high rocky ridges on all sides. We see a traditional black-robed necromancer surrounded by skeleton minions, and him turning to face us giving a mustache-twirling speech. And so we were ready. The actual Hatharac Islands campaign was set, we were finally in a group that wasn't going to try to kill each other, and we were ready to go with an all-out brawl.